Another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's get right into today's episode. Quick slate, big game against the Atlanta Hawks to get to a 500 record. Big game. Shouldn't necessarily be so, given the fact that Trae Young will not be in this matchup. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is a big game for the Orlando Magic to fight themselves back to 500 after starting the season 1-4. Would also be great momentum for them to come out of the weekend, win another game, put together what would be a 3-game winning streak, and help them get back on the right track. And one of the things that I want to start off with, although it's a bit negative, I think is an interesting indicator of what the quote-unquote vibes around the national media were when it came to the Orlando Magic coming into the season. What the vibes, the expectations, what the overall feel for the Orlando Magic to kick off the year was for certain people. And NBA analyst Tim Legler shared his thoughts, saying it has not looked good early. And one of the things that surprised me was this was a team that you're going to think they're going to be a top 5 defense, you think on paper, and they added Desmond Bane. So with all that toughness and all that defense, physicality, now you finally have shooting, but yet they're not making threes. Their offense has just not clicked. It's early. They got to take time to get it together, but I certainly expected Orlando to be better out the block. I think a lot of people kind of felt that way, and if you guys remember going back to the original for the schedule release, I said that I believe that this team could and should start the season out 15-5 or 16-4. You know, they play the Boston Celtics twice. That's pretty helpful for them, given the fact that the Celtics are relatively depleted. They don't play the Cleveland Cavaliers at all in the 2025 calendar year. They actually do not play the Cleveland Cavaliers for the first time until almost the end of January next year. And this is a team that is not going to see too many like high leverage playoff caliber teams throughout the first 20 to 25 games of the season. So my expectation was that they were going to be able to come out the gate swinging. You get real offensive firepower from Desmond Bane. You're able to slowly work Jalen Suggs back into the lineup. You have Franz Wagner coming off a Eurobasket, thinking he's going to be playing well. Same thing with Tristan da Silva. And some of those elements have been correct. The biggest thing that's hurt them so far is the three-point shooting, as Tim Legler mentioned before. This team is one of the bottom 3-point shooting teams in the league so far this season. They are actually the worst in terms of field goal attempts made from beyond the arc. Second worst, making 10 a game, and they're shooting 33.5%, which is tied for 20th in the league. So one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league still, even with the addition of Desmond Bane, even with the addition of Tyus Jones. And that's really the biggest thing that's hurting them outside of the whole pace aspect, right? That we talked about that on many a podcast. I'm not going to go into that too deep now because any of those episodes reflect how I feel about this offensive philosophy change. I think that if this team can get back to being a top 5 defense, as Tim mentioned, paired with the fact that this team just needs to find some kind of life from Desmond Bane, they should be in good shape. I think, honestly, this entire start for the Orlando Magic has more to do with Desmond Bane continuing to try to figure out where he fits offensively on this team, paired with this team needing to reestablish their defensive identity, more than it has anything to do with bad coaching, the pace ideology, all that stuff. If Desmond's hitting his shots and this team is a top 5 defense, they would be in a much better space. So at some point, I think the ship's going to right itself. And I think I've seen a handful of Orlando Magic fans. We're going to talk about you guys' comments a little bit later on from last video. But there's already a few of you that feels like, okay, had a little bit of a rough patch there to start off the season. We felt it early. This team realizes some of the things that they need to touch on. They need to slow down. We need more facilitation in the half court from Paulo Banchero. We need more aggressiveness getting to the basket from guys like Franz and Anthony Black and so on and so on. So now it feels like after a little bit of panic, the ship is starting to right itself a little bit. And it's good that people are starting to kind of come back to center with it. But this Orlando Magic team obviously still has a lot to build off of. Again, I think goal number one right now, let's get back to 500 or let's get to 500, right? So we'll talk about the game against the Hawks a little bit later on, but still. One thing that I thought was really interesting in terms of their start so far this season is the fact that one really good bright spot, aside from some of the play that we've seen from individuals like Franz Wagner and Tristan da Silva, I think they both have been really, really good to start this season. I also have mentioned Anthony Black a ton because I think he's been a real contributor off the bench, and I think with the Jalen Suggs situation, deserves to have a little bit more playing time with the starting lineup. Ironically, the Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr. starting lineup is one of the best five-man lineups in the NBA from a plus-minus perspective. Actually, shout out to the guys over at Sports Illustrated covering the Orlando Magic. They did a lot of the work for this, so I want to give them their credit. This lineup ranks second amongst 16 lineups that have played at least 50 minutes together, third amongst 21 lineups that have played at least 40 minutes, fifth amongst 31 lineups with at least 30 minutes played together, and 16th amongst 65 lineups with 20 minutes played. So from a net rating standpoint, obviously this is something that from a night-to-night basis can ebb and flow based off of things like whether or not you blow a team out or certain situations in terms of, your starting lineup versus like the Orlando Magic starting lineup versus like the Washington Wizards, who they just blew out by like 30, right? Those are certain things that can skew those numbers on any given day. But nonetheless, I do think it is a good representation that this unit can be highly effective together. Again, second most amongst 16 lineups that have played at least 50 minutes together. That means they're essentially the second best starting five in the league, because typically those 16 lineups are going to be compiled of only starting units, that because the 50 minutes played together typically is a compilation of guys who are going to see the floor for significant amount of time within that unit, and usually that would be a starting lineup. So again, that's second amongst 16 lineups. That's second in basically, again, I think that's looking at it from the perspective that that's usually like somewhere between second amongst all starting lineups or second amongst at least the top half of the league starting lineups. Obviously, we've seen a ton of injuries as well when you talk about the Pelicans or the Dallas Mavericks, right? So certain teams have not been able to experience their true starting lineup throughout the majority of this first start to the season. But that's a long-winded way of saying that the numbers say that despite some of the shooting woes for this team, the new starting five with Desmond Bane inserted into the rotation has been effective. It has been good when they've been together. The biggest issue is this team needs to defend and they need to be able to hit their threes. That's going to be the biggest thing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into this Magic versus Hawks preview, because I think that's actually going to be the part where this team kind of mirrors Atlanta, and then there's going to be one kind of X factor stat that I think is going to help separate themselves in that game. But Desmond Bane, for the month of November, if I had to put together 3 bullet points for this Orlando Magic team by the end of November, first off, by the end of November, this team needs to be in the double-digit victory category. Obviously, that's more than doable given the fact that they have all month to win 5 games, essentially, by that point. Or it would be Excuse me. That would have all month to win 7 games if you count tonight's game. So this team needs to be at double digits in terms of victories by the end of the month. I think that Desmond Bain needs to get towards 36, 37% from beyond the arc. And you would like to see Wendell Carter Jr. still averaging about 8 rebounds a night by the end of the month. Those are like the 3 things that I'm kind of circling as like interesting stat nuggets that will matter to me going into, the December Christmas stretch before the turn of the new year. Let's talk about the Orlando Magic playing the Atlanta Hawks. This is a quick preview, but I think it's one that should be relatively productive. These two teams are actually pretty on par with each other in terms of the way where they rank statistically this year. Orlando is 5th in pace of play. The Atlanta Hawks are 6th. Both of these teams are tied with one another for 3-point field goal percentage at 33.5. These are also two of the better rebounding teams in the league. Orlando is 10th. The Atlanta Hawks are right there around middle of the pack at 14th. The biggest separator between these two teams is, one, the Atlanta Hawks have been really good at moving around the ball, 5th in the NBA in assists, 28.4, as opposed to the Orlando Magic, one of the worst teams in terms of moving the ball around so far this season, 4th worst with 23.7 assists. And the Orlando Magic are also much worse at taking care of the ball. They're averaging about 16.3 turnovers a game, which is around 5th worst in the league. The Atlanta Hawks are averaging 13.3 turnovers a game. That's 7th least in the NBA. So move the ball around and take care of the ball at a really high clip. The separator for the Orlando Magic is one stat and one stat only, to be honest with you. Offensive rebounding. This team has been a top 10 offensive rebounding squad to start off the year. They are averaging 12.3 offensive rebounds per game, which is literally tied for 10th, while the Atlanta Hawks are at 20th with 10.4. Although the discrepancy is not that large, the biggest thing is that this Orlando Magic team has done a really decent job of crashing the offensive glass. You have to give a lot of credit to Wendell Carter Jr., who has not been the most effective on either side of the floor, but one thing that he has been able to provide is real glass consistency in terms of being able to get the rebound on both sides of the ball and help end possessions or extend possessions. So that's going to be the biggest thing is with this Orlando Magic team and the size that they're going to have. From a size advantage standpoint against the Atlanta Hawks, I think that you want to make this a game where you muck it up. You want to get to the paint early and often. I think you want to put, if you're at Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner, you want to put a lot of pressure on Kristaps Porzingis and Onyeka Okongwu as rim protectors, especially because I think from a physicality standpoint, I don't think either one of them can mess with Paulo Banchero. I just genuinely don't believe that. I think that was proven in their last matchup because, Paulo absolutely snapped in that first game against them. Let me go back. That was it Paulo or was it Franz? Excuse me. Paulo had 11 and 6. I believe it was Franz actually who had himself a pretty strong game against Atlanta. Nonetheless, I think that Paulo is starting to catch his stride a little bit, and I think that he should be able to abuse that matchup on the inside. He's looking for a bounce back game against Atlanta, it looks like, because I misconstrued that. He actually only had 11 points and 6 rebounds in that game. So I think this is going to be one of those where he wants to get his get back on the road again against this team. And no Trae Young in this one as well. So I think the pace dictates, the pace can be dictated by Orlando a lot more in that sense as well. This is again, I can't stress this enough. It's not a ton of analysis in this podcast today, and I apologize for that because at the end of the day, between the last real analytical podcast we did from a game-to-game basis, they've only played once, so there's only but so much that can be adjusted from one game to the other with still such a small sample size. It's very simple. This Orlando Magic team needs to beat Atlanta on the glass. They have to put a ton of pressure on the rim in terms of scoring in the paint. That's one of the biggest things that everybody has been talking about in the beginning of the season. The three-point shooting has been terrible, but the most offensive thing, if you're an Orlando Magic fan, is you're wondering why this team is not attacking the glass when they have so much size with guys like Paolo and Franz and Anthony Black and so on and so on. And then continuing to protect the three-point line. The Atlanta Hawks are one of the worst three-point shooting teams as well in the league, so it should be okay being able to protect that spot. That means it's going to be a battle in the trenches between those two teams of who gets to the free throw line the most. I think that if the Orlando Magic are able to win the free throw battle, and I'm not just talking about getting there 23 to 25 times, because that's nice. The Orlando Magic have had a consistent role in their own demise over the last handful of games because they're leaving points on the table. And that's going to be a big detriment to them as well. I think if they can get to the free throw line and convert offensive and defensive rebound at a high clip and win the points in the paint battle, the Atlanta Hawks are going to get packed up, and the Orlando Magic will have won their third straight game and be 500 for the first time in since, the second game, obviously. So last but not least, I've tried to make this, I don't want to say a tradition necessarily, but I've tried to make this relatively consistent on the podcast over the last handful of episodes of being more in tune with what you guys are saying in the comment section. So thank you all for dropping comments every single video. I go through all of them, and even though there's some that I may miss, there's also a lot of them that I try my best to get to and address on the podcast directly so we can talk about them, share our thoughts, and get more of a vibe for where the fan base as a whole is on the team on a night-to-night basis. So I'm going to work bottom to top this time because I tend to start from the top and then, work my way back. So we have Sources Say Media, who says, bro, you have to consider the whole reason why Ja would be available in the first place. His baggage, great player, but he does not fit the Magic type of player mindset wise. We in a different neighborhood, brother. Let's say they would do it. I'd do an even trade back for Bane. That's hilarious. We already overpaid for him, so the Magic ain't trying to give up anything else that would chip away at their core or future to get a problematic star. We ain't traded for Ja. Jay the Evangelist 777 says, in response to that, I personally don't agree with trading for Ja Morant myself, even though I think the Magic are playing mediocre right now. Fair. But when your job is on the line or you just want results, I see a desperation move like this coming. The Magic would have to give up way too much for Ja, in my opinion, but I foresee a scenario if the Magic are not playing good. I see a major splash coming. The Magic ownership / front office wants second round in the playoff minimum, and they already not afraid to break this group to do so. I can see a splash like Fox, but knowing our front office, Ja has no chance of wearing the Mickey ears. We not getting Ja or Fox, and I don't want them either. Ja's a okay. We're gonna leave that part alone. And Fox is chilling on the Spurs. Why would he come to us? So that entire thread was in response to my question last episode, where there was a trade proposal put together. I believe it was by ESPN or some other site that basically would send Ja Morant to the Orlando Magic in exchange for Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, and draft capital. And I agreed that, first of all, I thought that the draft, the overall haul for Ja Morant was a little bit steep, given that his background and slow decline offensively makes it where he should have a little bit more of a more applicable price point. But I also feel like this point about his personality is a very important one. If you listen to the podcast, I touched on Ja Morant being someone that if you're going to trade for him, one of the biggest things you have to ask yourself as a GM or as ownership is, do you have the internal infrastructure to take on a personality like that where you're able to tame it in a way that doesn't allow you to simply just become the next franchise on his hit list, right? Jimmy Butler is a perfect example of this, where the Miami Heat for the longest time were able to have the type of internal infrastructure to really deal with the personality that he has that can be relatively volatile, so much so that whether it was the Bulls, the Sixers, or the Timberwolves, he was always able to kind of smooth talk his way out of town due to being disgruntled. And for the longest time, the Heat were able to keep that at bay. But even for them, there became a point where the situation became too untenable. And I think that although John Morant doesn't have the same kind of history that Jimmy Butler does in terms of trying to, manipulate his way into different situations, I do still think that when you're talking about a volatile personality, having that kind of base as an organization is important when you're talking about trying to bring in this kind of guy, because the talent is not always, it's one of those, the juice isn't always worth the squeeze things. And I think that's what this comment is trying to say too, is that he may be a really talented player, but will the meshing of his personality, will that discrepancy overtake the fact that he's such a talented player? Or will he come in and play good citizen, be back with his boy Desmond Bain, and all of a sudden he's hooping for us because he's playing with a little bit more joy behind it? Really depends. All right, this again, shout out to Sources Say Media. This comment says JD Kuntz 6919. Shout out to you. He says, I don't see any possible trade for John Morant. He doesn't fit in the character, mold, and culture that management has established. Very similar in response to that. John Doe underneath says, I know character matters in Orlando, and he ain't it. I think a lot of people would kind of agree that John Morant is an interesting wild card, as somebody that's going to be kind of a notable storyline over the next couple of weeks of like what his trade market value it looks like at this given moment. This comment from Goxilla says trade Banchero for Giannis next summer. I I have a weird feeling both sides say no for different reasons. I don't think the Bucks say yeah because they don't. I don't think they want to give up Giannis. Maybe if maybe the Bucks say yeah because Banchero's under contract for the next 4 seasons after that summer. But Giannis would have 1 year left on his contract when he would land in Orlando after this trade. So I think Orlando would actually like really be hurt by that, because, or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe you would view it as like high commodity expiring contract. You let him go after, and then you build around Franz Wagner. But like, why do that when you have Paulo Banchero already under contract, and like he is a linchpin for like this franchise. So don't really agree with that one too much. Giannis is a great talent, but I don't know if that works well for what Orlando is on right now. And timeline wise, like Giannis, if Paulo Banchero needs to play in a lineup that has legitimate spacing, like Giannis really does need a lot more floor spacing around him in order to truly be effective. And Orlando just does not have it right now. What's up, cool brother? Had 2 back-to-back comments that says they need to upgrade, that the Magic need to upgrade center, and that moving both Suggs and Black to get John Morant is too rich. But at the end of the day, we need a true point guard. We've been saying this on the podcast the last couple of episodes. You guys have been really active in the comment section talking about how this team needs a real facilitator. We've said a handful of times that in order for this team to really play to the style that it seems like they're trying to adapt, it's going to have a lot more to do with their ability to move the ball. If you're going to be bottom 4 in assists per game, you're not going to be this high-paced team and also be efficient at it, right? That's why they're one of the lowest efficiency teams in the NBA, both as a 3-point shooting team and as a regular 2-point jump shooting team. And not to mention they're not getting to the paint as much as they should be. So I definitely agree. True point guard would really help. Thought Tyus Jones would be a help off the bench, in regard to that. Just hasn't been that just yet, but I think he has a chance to kind of turn that around. We'll see. Upgraded center, we'll see. I think all of the stuff in regards to Wendell Carter Jr. He might be one of the most polarizing players in the NBA right now, and that feels so crazy to say, given the fact that he's like nowhere near a star player. But Magic fans are very split on Wendell Carter Jr. for the most part, because like when he plays well, like he really is like an effective center that does a lot of good things on both sides of the floor. And then like when he comes out and puts up those stinkers, you're like, how did Ryan Kalkbrenner have 17 and 7 against you? Or like stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? Where it's like you're really wondering, like, okay, Wendell, you're nice, but you're like so much of like an average center that you alone are kind of like lowering our ceiling because of the fact that like you just don't do enough on either side of the floor. I think Zach Lowe kind of alluded to him as being like this, uh, you know, he has a bag of tricks, but he doesn't necessarily have any like real elite skill that he can like hang his hat on. And that's very true. He's not like an elite rim defender. He's not an elite rim roller. He's not this dangerous screen setter. He's not a knockdown 3-point shooter that helps space the floor. He's nothing in particular that like gives you this skill set where it's like if you have to lean on him to do this one thing that really stands out, he can do it. He's kind of like uh they say that people have a billion different skills, but they don't really have a master of any of them, right? He's really in that mold as the center position where he does contribute in so many different ways, but there's no one skill set that you can point to that says, yeah, yes, that's the thing that makes Wendell Carter Jr. special, and that does hurt him. So I'm a little torn between upgrading at center right now, but I can't blame you for saying it because, again, Orlando Magic fans are torn. Last but not least, this one from Jay the Evangelist says, I honestly feel that the Magic are not in the top 4 or 5 seed minimum. Weltman is going to start doing some spontaneous desperation moves, and I can see a trade like this happening, referring to John Morant stuff, especially considering they've already did business with Memphis recently. I honestly can see a scenario of them firing Mosley if they continue to play under expectations too as well. Response said, yes, they are. They have to figure it out, how to play the right way. There's a lot more within this comment. We might end up spinning back to this one at a later time frame. But I do think the premise of the comment is that this is a team that has the chance that if things start falling apart again, might end up acting out of desperation. Sources say media was actually pretty active in my comment section. Thank you for that. He says, nah, I think they're back on track. They tried to play without Paulo doing most of the ball handling at first, and it didn't work. Now he's back to it, and they're winning. They might go on their typical 9-game November run now. That would be a great scenario for them, especially because they still have 3 more games on the road, if you count this Atlanta game, if I'm not mistaken. So this is a really good opportunity for them to kind of reestablish themselves and put the league back on notice, because those first handful of games, these first handful of games in general, have made people believe that the Orlando Magic's offense is not going to have any real uptick from where it has been, and that's just kind of unacceptable given the fact that they invested so much this offseason to addressing their biggest issues: ball handling, ball movement, and 3-point shooting. So yeah, this is going to be a team that if they're caught in a bad spot, I would not be surprised if they act out of desperation, given the fact that the expectations both from the inside and the outside are and should be pretty high. I also think that this team is not going to make any kind of real crazy decisions until they've played at least 30 games. Like, if this team is 15-15 at the 30-game mark, okay, we might really want to start asking questions about what needs to get done, because something drastic might need to happen. But otherwise, I think they're going to try to play this entire year out. It's very similar to like the Cleveland Cavaliers when they first assembled that foursome group of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley, right? Like, yes, they dealt with injury issues significantly the first 2 years, and that gave them a little bit of leeway to kind of kick the can down the road of like Let's see how this whole thing builds together. Let's see how it continues to develop. They also ended up switching coaches, and that ended up showing a completely different side of this team as well. I think the Orlando Magic are going to want to see at least one full season with this group together. And the guy who I think is more likely to be on the chopping block is Jamal Mosley, not them making some kind of drastic, shake it up trade that ends up moving more draft assets and more key pieces. I think that they would, excuse me, want to see what this group looks like together in 1 year, identify whether or not Jamal Mosley can build upon that year, and if they feel as though he's not the guy for it, they replace him. Otherwise, I think this team stays intact. So yeah. With all that being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Again, sorry for the lack of like real in-depth analysis, but I mean, again, there is not a ton of sample size to work with, especially between this game and last game. Appreciate all you guys for your comments down below. Again, continue to comment your thoughts and feelings on the Orlando Magic. Question of the day for this one is, what is your predicted record for this Orlando Magic team by the end of November? I'm very intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. I believe that this Orlando Magic team should be in the double-digit win category by the end of the month. That's just my personal thought, but you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel. Remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos, and I'll see you guys about tomorrow. But until then, peace.